Well, Ton, over here with Ring Ring Marketing, we specialize in helping funeral homes and cemeteries generate more at-need calls and pre-need calls. I would like to introduce you to Dale Clark. Dale Clark, a fourth generation funeral director, will share stories from 35 years of being a funeral service early adopter. He'll tell you the truth about some things that he tried, some absolutely great ideas that he truly believed in, and how they really turned out. Please welcome Dale Clark.
Hi, I'm Dale Clark, and I'm here to present, to tell you the truth. Before I get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Dale Clark, a serial early adopter. I'm a fourth generation funeral director. I went to Northwestern University where I graduated with a degree in industrial engineering, after which I was a naval officer for 5 years and got out, came back home, joined the family business, went to Worsham College of Mortuary Science where I got my degree and then got licensed as a funeral director here in Michigan. I'm a member of ICCFA, NFDA, and also of Selected Independent Funeral Homes. I happen to be 63 years old, and I've been in the funeral business now for 35 years or so. You know, when you look at the lineup of seminars and presentations at any funeral organization's annual meetings, it's always filled with things with catchy titles and best practices, all presented by industry pundits and funeral folks who think they figured out the secret sauce. That easy button to make your business financially thrive or improve your mental well-being or to get customers to line up at your door. And then go ahead and read the funeral trade magazines that have articles about the latest new trend that's sweeping the country or the product that's creating the amazing customer experience. Or a training program sure to make your staff come together and operate like a well-oiled machine at every touch point. Yet there never seems to be any follow-up on how those things really worked 5 years down the road. I've had conversations with funeral guys at some of these meetings, and I say, did that really work? Did those products really sell? Did your days and accounts receivable really go down like that guy told you they would? Well, I've been thinking about this for a while, and I presented this to ICCFA, and I'm here today to tell you the truth about some of the things that we have tried and how they really turned out. And I'm also here to tell you that it's okay when things don't work. It's okay that they don't happen the way that all the good guys say in the magazines. This is kind of a list of all the early adopter things that I did. I have a habit of seeing new things around and trying to, start out and make those things happen. Some of them have been good, some of them they haven't. The Tribute Store was one of the first York quarter panel rooms, and I put that in here at the funeral home. We started a family center over 25 years ago. In about that same time period, we got heavily involved into an aftercare and grief support program. We've started a low-cost cremation company. I built a new branch. We were very involved in getting female funeral directors and arrangers started here at the funeral home way before a lot of people were. We turned one of our branches into Sunset Celebrations Event Center. We've put our efforts into doing an employee improvement program, a search of excellence kind of thing. I've been involved in lots of commercial bank loans. I'm a member of the Life Story Network here in Michigan and a nationwide thing. We were one of the first funeral homes to actually do therapy dogs, and we're now heavily involved in pet death care, and we operate a pet cremation company. So as you can see, I've done a lot of different things. And actually, when I put this presentation together, I was going to try and talk about all of those things. And I realized there's no way that I could have put all of that information together in a 45-minute presentation. So with the help of my wife, who said, Dale, you can't talk about all of that stuff. You need to narrow it down. So she's helped me do that. And so today I'm going to talk about these 5 things. And if you want to know about the other ones, you can get a hold of me afterwards. My email will be at the end of this, and I'd be happy to share notes with you or discuss those kind of things later on. But anyway, today I'm going to talk about our low-cost cremation company. I'm going to talk about our Celebration Event Center. I'm going to talk about the Life Story Network. I'm going to talk about borrowing money from the bank and hopefully give you some lessons that I learned. It took me a long time to learn. And I'm going to talk about our family reception center. So let's get started. Back in 2006, we purchased a brand new crematory and removal business from some guys who built a new crematory in our town and thought that funeral directors would just call them. Well, unfortunately for those guys, the other crematory in town was operated by the Vault Company, and they didn't realize that the funeral homes are really kind of an old boy network. And after 3 months of nobody calling them, I kind of touched base with them and said, hey guys, maybe it's a good idea if we buy your crematory and do things from there. At that time, we were at 45% cremation, doing 450 calls a year, 3 branches. And we figured if we owned our own crematory, it would be a good thing and we could sustain it. And maybe we can get some other funeral homes to use our facilities or not. And so we purchased this from those fellas and renamed it Phoenix Crematory Services. At that time, we also started a firewall brand. That's kind of a term that a lot of guys use that says, let's start something so nobody else can start it. So we were the first ones in our town that started a low-cost crematory business, and this is what we called it. So with little or no advertising, we got going. All we had was a website. We did word of mouth. We networked with hospice. The thing that was different about what we were doing was that we had arrangers meet with our family. Here in Michigan, you do not have to be a funeral director to wait on families. So I had the operator of Phoenix Crematory Services, who happened to be my stepson, meet with the families. We always let the families know when we met with them that Phoenix Crematory Services was not an actual funeral home, but we were a sister company of the Clock Funeral Home. And we only provided direct cremation. So if the families wanted more services, they had to talk to the crematory. This worked very well. And slowly but surely, through that word of mouth and the networking and things, we grew to 100 calls per year by the 4th year. And during that time, we also learned as funeral directors at the funeral home that when we would take price shopper calls, we could direct them over to our lower cost cremation company. And a lot of people move that way. And the slide on the screen says primary firms for DHS. What that means is our welfare calls and all of that stuff, we would direct over to the crematory, and that actually made things work a lot easier at the main branch of the funeral home. One thing I want to tell you about low-cost crematory businesses, it's a different clientele than what you have at a regular funeral home where they're looking for more services. They really want just simple arrangements. And what we found was that they actually appreciated the fact that they didn't have to talk to a funeral director and they didn't have to talk to somebody from the funeral home. And that's why they wanted to go to the crematory services straightforward. Another thing we learned that, yep, we could do payment plans there and kind of institute them. And so we set that all up and we actually set things up with the bank. So we would actually make those payments straight from their debit cards. It worked pretty well. And we didn't have a whole lot of things, issues with that. When we first set up the website for the crematory, we did have an online arranging part of it that was there. Because, of course, everybody in the industry said, you got to get an online crematory business. Well, it was a little bit of a challenge for us at that time to track that, who was going to keep up with all that information. And so we had some communications issues with that and keeping that going. And the reality was not that many people were actually using that website or wanted to make arrangements completely on the website. So after a short period of time, probably only a year or so, we completely abandoned that part of the low-cost crematory business and that part of the website. We found that people really preferred a face-to-face contact with everything. So eventually, the firm has grown to, we're doing 175 calls out of that place now. But I will tell you this, without a doubt, and sometimes the people that you've read in trade magazines and things like that, they may fib to you a little, but this will, if you start a low-cost cremation company, it will cannibalize your main business. It's just a fact of life. And so you have to accept that and understand that you're going to do that. But I think that the society is wanting to do that kind of thing now at this stage of the game. So right now, our cremation rate between all of our firms has now grown from 45% to 80%. And our whole area here in Western Michigan is 70% cremation. And unfortunately, as is probably happening in a lot of your areas, we now have 5 other low-cost cremation providers in our area. So competition is pretty tough. It's pretty price-oriented, and it's still a challenge. So I guess my lesson learned here, was it a good move to do this? Yes, I'm glad that we started a low-cost cremation company. It was a challenge, and it has, caused some issues with cash flow and things like that, but it's a part of the business, and it's a change in how things are. We did not have to do major marketing. And if you're doing that, you can do it with word of mouth, your website, and it does help to network with hospice people. So let's go on to the next section. Talk a little bit about our Sunset Celebrations Event Center. I don't have all my notes memorized here, so I'm going to do a little reading, and I hope it's not out of the place to do that. But back in 2013, we were operating a small branch in a town about 10 miles from our main facility. And we had owned this small 2,500 square foot funeral home for about 25 years. And we were doing 30 or so calls out of it annually. Well, that year, an early frost kind of caught us off guard before we had properly winterized the facility. And we had a pipe burst in a ceiling. And unfortunately, it ran undetected for several days. And when we finally got there, after assessing the damage, we decided that rather than return the facility to its previously less than adequate setup, that we would open up the space and try and turn it into a small event center that could continue to handle funerals and memorial services and visitations, along with other types of services like open houses, birthday parties, wedding receptions, small gatherings, company holiday parties, and other types of things like that. We added a small kitchen to the place for heating up food, not commercial kitchen or anything else like that. Kept the decorating very simple, very straightforward. We added some TVs and a whole sound system for the whole thing so people could rent it out and do any type of function that they would want. For funerals and visitations, we would add some other rugs and things like that to kind of soften up the place. And we figured out a couple of different configurations with tables and chairs and how we would set it up for different types of events and things like that. We renamed the facility Sunset Celebrations Event Center. And so after about a year of remodeling and do things, we had a soft opening. We had a wedding reception from one of my staff members. We did a small trade show for like Tupperware lady type people that did that kind of thing. We had a few funerals. We had some baby showers, and actually things were going pretty well. In fact, the word got out and ICCFA heard about it, and they came and interviewed us. And as you can see from the screen there, they did a front page article of what year? I think it was February of 2015, where they did an 8-page article of the event center. It was as if we had discovered the next best, greatest thing in funeral service, according to the article. Very positive. It was nice to get all of that attention and everything else. And we received lots of phone calls from other funeral homes and friends of ours and asked us about how was that thing working. Well, as it would turn out, little did they know that we started having roadblocks almost as soon as we opened the place. So even though the article said it was the next and best, latest, greatest thing, it really wasn't. After we rented out the place for a small New Year's Eve party, the local government kind of caught wind that we weren't just doing funerals out of that place anymore. And we didn't realize that we were breaking any zoning laws. We figured any event is the same as any other event. People gather together, they share stories, they eat food, they drink beverages, and they celebrate life's events. But when the government heard about it, and this is located in a smaller village, they sent us a cease and desist order and said we could only do funeral events. Well, if we held other events, they told us we'd be considered a banquet hall, and that's not how we were zoned. So we said, well, okay, we can be a banquet hall. So we said, well, let's just change the designation to the banquet hall, and that'd fix the whole problem. Well, The problem was the zoning laws for the banquet hall said we needed 2 acres of land, and we were located on only 1.2 acres of land. So we put in a variance and said we requested a variance of the zoning rules to say, hey, we just do this. Well, we had a public meeting, and at that public meeting, we found out some powers that be. A couple of older gentlemen in the village who used to be pretty important in town and still had a lot of influence didn't really want us to have this thing. I don't know why. Sometimes it's just a power struggle in those kind of things, and they just didn't want us to succeed. So even though we had meetings, we promised them that we would have this all under control. The zoning request got denied. So the next step up, we said, well, we'll go to the planning commission and try and get the zoning rules changed instead of just a request. We got lawyers involved. We had a lot of discussions back and forth with a lot of people and things. And the reality is, after 8 months or a year of trying to get the rules changed, we realized that we were just beating our head against a wall and we weren't going to get any place. You just can't fight City Hall when there's little towns like that. So rather than spend any money, more money on lawyers and all of that stuff, we just, kind of decided to lay low for a while and not do that. The lessons learned here is that, sometimes great plans don't always work. No matter how much you may think the community may want it and do everything like that, sometimes you just can't get around those things. So for the last number of years, we've continued to do 20-ish funerals through there and kind of do some events kind of under the wire and stuff like that. But because we still didn't have the correct zoning and things, we really couldn't advertise the place and do the events to do that. So the reality is the building in the event center is not a success. I said, and the reality is what we learned through all of these years of doing this, there's no money in small event centers. So I know Funeral Land out there and everybody says, you should be doing this kind of stuff. It's not there. And one of the challenges is that your competition is not other big event centers. It's the VFW and clubs and churches. I said, because you can't charge enough money and fill the facility if you only got a capacity of 100 people. And so we've just basically faded away from that. And eventually, I think we're going to close the facility down. So after a 10-page article in ICCFA and everybody thinking that we really had the tiger by the tail and we were going to do it, it didn't work out. So that's the rest of the story. And that last line there on this slide, my wife added that. She says, we didn't want to be in the tablecloth business. And for any of you that have event centers, have been renting things out, you know what I'm talking about. Tablecloths are a pain in the butt. And when you get into the event business, that's one of the main and primary things that you're ever going to do. So let's move on forward from here. Next, I'm going to talk about the Life Story Network. Some of you may have heard of this. Some of you may not have. There's other organizations out there that kind of have some similar names and similar things. But I'd like to tell you a little bit about this because I truly believe in this network. And even though we've had some challenges, I still support it and do things. But I want to tell you a little bit more about it. Maybe you'll be interested and take a look at it yourself. The Life Story Network is a print and media company that was founded about 2000-ish by a couple of funeral directors here in Michigan. They decided that they wanted to create better funerals, and the way to do that was to share someone's life story. So they created a system that produced professionally written life stories, absolutely amazing videos, and a suite of unique printed products, all delivered electronically back to the funeral home. And the reason that I joined was about that time period, I actually had, we had a staff writer that was writing stories for us, and we were doing our own folders and things like that. And when I was introduced to the Life Story Network, I realized that they were years ahead of where I was technologically wise, and there was no way I was ever going to catch up with them or create the kind of stuff that they were doing. And it was way beyond what anybody else was doing in funeral land at that time. They had actually created a very recognizable brand of funeral. At least that's what I believed at the time. And branding was the big thing. That was discussions. There were lots of business books out there and everything else. And I thought, boy, this is something that could really go. It could become regional, it could be national, and I wanted to be part of it. The Life Story guys had created a system of how you provide them information and photos, and in 24 hours, they could turn around a 1,500-word life story, a color brochure with dozens of pictures in it. They created several different videos for every family, and the videos told this life story on screen. The words were there. It was an amazing service. It increased family satisfaction. It made my team of directors better. It made us better arrangers. It changed the way I do funerals. It was amazing. I loved it. Family participation was good. It increased our host guest experience. When people came to visitations, they stood in front of the screens and watched the videos because they told the story. And the printed materials and everything that we provided was unbelievable. One thing that was unique about what Life Story does that other people did was that they sent the products back to you electronically, and we actually produced them here at the funeral home. So if you needed more folders, you weren't looking for overnight stuff or printing them at Kinko's or something like that. We actually had the equipment here to do printing and burning videos and all of that stuff and everything else. It was true personalization. It made the funeral so personal because it's based on the life story of that person. So even though I loved it, I truly believed in it, I still do, it didn't work as well as we wanted it to. Because one of the issues that we had, and one of the things, what it was when we started, there were half a dozen other funeral directors here in West Michigan that had joined Life Story. And we were all like-minded guys. We were all independent owners. But when we joined, the whole concept was that we were going to add Life Story to the name of the funeral home. So our funeral home became called Clock Life Story Funeral Home. Well, unfortunately, when we did that and we changed our signs, the community perception was that we had sold out to some conglomerate. And I'm sure my competitors kind of helped tell that story along the way. And the reality is we didn't. And even out in funeral land, when this all started, a lot of people were not informed correctly and believed that this was more of a franchise operation, and the franchise cost $50,000 to join. Well, that wasn't true. It was never true, and it never got out like that. It was a little expensive to get involved in this. And the reason why, back in 2005, when you bought a 42-inch monitor, 42-inch flat screen TV, and you needed a number of those around your building to make this whole program work, they cost $2,500. When you had to get scanners to do that stuff, they were more expensive. The computers were more expensive. And Life Story helped us get all of that kind of stuff up. But 15 years ago, when we started with that program, the amount of money that we had to put in it was a major league investment. And in fact, if I bought the same equipment now that I had to get then, it would have cost a tenth of what I had to spend back there. That's just because they were so far ahead of the game, the equipment that they were using to make this happen do that. Unfortunately, we also lost a few funeral directors because they just didn't grasp the whole Life Story concept and the process. It's unfortunate, but that happens when you move to those kind of new things. And even though I still think funeral service is kind of moving in that direction, we lost some of those people. Some of that's unfortunate. Some of it was good. Sometimes funeral directors need to move on and just settle into where they were. But we had funeral directors that were with us for 25 years and they had lots of experience, but they had a hard time doing this differently. The other downside of the Life Story thing is it's more work, without a doubt. Arrangement conferences typically took, when you were doing a full Life Story, at least 2 hours, if not 2.5 hours or more. And then afterwards, there was a lot of prep time for the funeral directors to take the notes that they had done and enter them in a computer to scan in photographs. And then once that stuff comes back, our support staff had to print that material and burn DVDs and create all the wonderful products that are out there, but they took time to do that. And unfortunately, even though Life Story now has 50 different funeral homes, that have joined. The initial group that we had, and even since that time, the hopes of creating this collaborative network, at least that's what I had hoped when we had joined that we would all kind of work together and create advertising and marketing that would create a regional brand, and then maybe a state brand, and then maybe a national brand of funeral homes that people would understand and follow. Unfortunately, because we were all independent operators, we, as all funeral directors do, we all think we know what we're supposed to be doing. And it was very hard for all of us that joined to come together with a very focused marketing campaign. And the principals in Life Story and the other funeral directors that were part of the thing didn't all think the same. They're all wonderful guys. They all have good ideas. But unfortunately, Life Story lacked a consistent marketing message, not only to the public, but a consistent marketing message to funeral homes to get to join. And the bottom line is, after 15 years, as much as I love it and I'm still part of it, it didn't move the needle. And when I say it didn't move the needle, it didn't convince people to use our funeral home over other funeral homes. And as time went on, there's other products out there, and the public, even though I thought the videos and the print material were that much better than everybody else's, unfortunately, the public didn't see that difference. They look at a fancy folder with colored pictures in it and they think it's the same. They see a slideshow and they think that's a Life Story. And you really can't convince people to do that. So at the end of the game, we've taken the Life Story off of our name just to keep it as Klock Funeral Home. We're still part of it. I still believe in it. I'm still, we still do Life Stories, but not to the extent that we did. I hope that somewhere in the future that maybe somebody else will pick up the reins of this company and maybe bring it to more funeral homes all over the country, and maybe it'll eventually happen. And if it doesn't, it's too bad, but it's a good thing. And I encourage, if any of you want to talk about it, give me a call and we'll go from there. So next topic, borrowing money from the bank. 30 years ago, when I first got in this business, I'm in my 30s. I understood about borrowing money from the bank. I had bought my first house and I understood mortgages and 15-year or 30-year mortgages and amortizations and all of that kind of stuff. And I had a handle on this stuff. But I hadn't had a whole lot of experience in business loans. Even though my father was on a bank board and my grandfather was on the bank board, they never really sat down with me and said, hey, this is how this works and this is what you need to know. And I think the main reason is because we had been a successful firm. Whenever they wanted to do anything, typically there was enough money around and we didn't have to borrow money from the bank. So there wasn't a whole lot of experience, even with my father who was on a bank board. So we had a major project going on at that time. We were expanding our building out and doing some major remodeling and needed a substantial loan at that time. So that's the first time that I ever had to do that, and learned slowly but surely that commercial loans are not like home mortgages. Now, I know some of you guys out there are going, well, of course they're not. How come you didn't know that? But when I was 30 some years old, I didn't know because nobody told me. So that's why I'm making this a part of my thing. So some of you that don't know this may pass this on to your younger members or things like that. And I'm here to teach you just a little bit about this. So maybe you don't make some of the same mistakes that I made, or at least take 15 years to learn that this is how it works. So as you can see on my slide here, where it says 2% over prime, amortized over 20 years and a 5-year balloon, that's kind of a typical phrase that bankers use. And when we first did that, I kind of understood that. I got the numbers and realized kind of how that worked, but it didn't really settle into my brain right away. Because when they came in and they did the loan and they said, this is what it is, and we're going to loan you X amount of dollars, and these are your payments, and this is what they're going to be. And I said, okay, sounds good. We could afford those, and we got the building going, and it was a great deal. So my lesson to you is always remember this, that, the early payments on any loan are almost always interest. I know we get those amortization schedules when you buy a car or when you buy anything. And if you look at those close, you realize that, when you make a $500 payment on a first loan or something like that, $465 of that goes to interest, and the other part is what pays off principal. So that's how the banks make their money. That's how it all works. So I want to explain a little bit about what a balloon payment really means. And these aren't just, adjustable rate mortgages for your house. This is typically how a bank does it. So when you have a 5-year balloon on your mortgage or on your commercial loan from the bank, it means at the 5-year point, you're supposed to either pay off the whole loan or you're going to renegotiate it. Well, I just thought, okay, at the 5-year point, we renegotiate the loan. So if I can, kind of rip through some numbers pretty quick, and I'm not going to put them on the screen, just kind of tell you this, let me just throw some numbers out really quick in this, so here's a typical commercial loan. Let's say you borrow $1 million at 5.75% interest amortized over 20 years with a 5-year balloon. So if you did that, your payments would be $7,000 a month, and that makes sense to you. You can plug that into your loan calculator and kind of see how the principal and interest is all over. But at that 5-year point, when you go back to renegotiate things, it kind of all starts over again. And the banker meets with you at that 5-year point. He takes you out to lunch and says, hey, do you need some more money? You need a new roof? Maybe your parking lot needs a little thing. And you go, yeah, I could use a couple more dollars here and there. And he says, okay, we can redo that. And so at that point, he says, okay, I'll loan you another $100,000. Okay. And he says, in fact, the interest rates have gone down and we'll restructure this. And instead of paying, $7,000 a month, we're going to lower that payment down to, maybe $6,000 a month. You go, boy, that's a good deal. I just, renegotiated this loan. My payments are less and I got all this new stuff and things are fine. So you sign on the dotted line and you go through that. And what you don't realize, or I didn't realize at that time, that when you renegotiate that loan, it starts all over again from the beginning. Okay, so all those payments that you made before, they were all for interest. So, another 5 years down the line, you do this again and it all comes out. And if you really look at the numbers, you realize that after 10 years, you'd paid the bank $750,000, but you still owe them $850,000. That's because that's the way the banks work. It's, and they aren't going to sit down and tell you that. They give you the paperwork and you really have to pay attention to this. But I'm here as an older guy putting my arm around the shoulder of one of you younger guys saying, fellas, this is how it works. So you need to really understand this. And it actually took me 10 to 15 years before I realized that, we weren't paying off this loan as quick as we ought to do this. So here's some lessons that I want you to learn about borrowing money from the bank. And things are a little better now because there's a lot of SBA loans out there. And one thing nice about SBA loans is that they do lock in rates for a specific period of time. And so you don't really end up with that balloon. So be careful if they have those kind of statements when you're talking to your banker, if they have balloon statements, because that's the time that you renegotiate it and starts all over again. One of the lessons I learned was try to avoid if you have older loans that you borrowed before. And sometimes when I sat down with the banker, they say, well, I see that you borrowed, $40,000 before to buy a new hearse or something like that. He says, why don't we roll that? You still owe that. We're going to roll that into the loan. And you go, oh, that's good. So we'll bundle those all together. Well, that's really not the best idea because when you roll that in, that's starting that loan all over again. And they're sucking all the interest out of your money and then it's not going down on principal. And the real answer to, paying off your loans early is to make extra principal payments. Sometimes that's hard, but that's the only way you're really going to get that loan down in a hurry and get out of some debt. I'm not saying debt's bad. Sometimes you need to do that and borrow money to move on, but you need to do the math. Look at the numbers, multiply things out, see how much it's going to cost you to do this, and hopefully you'll get out of this eventually. And we're into my fifth section here, kind of coming down towards the end of things. Let's see how far have I been talking? They had me start a timer here in this, and I'm doing pretty good, keeping up with things. So the fifth section of what I'd like to talk about is our family center for receptions. 25 years ago, we purchased a big older house and dentist office that was surrounded by the funeral home. And we ended up expanding our building out and connecting to it. You can see the picture there of this big old house. And we turned the first floor of it into what we called at that time a family center. At that time, very few funeral homes were doing receptions or had reception areas or things like that. And we felt that because this property came available, it was a good idea. It made sense for us to connect to it. And we figured we'd give it a try. So you can see the picture on that. We turned the first floor in. We put in, a dozen 4-top tables and a couple of longer ones and bought chairs and things like that. We converted an area, put a couple of bathrooms in, and there was a kitchen in the house, but we didn't put commercial equipment in. And when we opened this, and we still do things like this, we don't have any food prep in here. When you do receptions and you do food prep in the place, then you have to deal with the health department, making sure you're keeping up with all of that information and everything else. The reality is it's much easier to stay out of that so you don't do food prep. And if that happens, then you need to work with a caterer. When we first opened this, we did a very small initial room fee for this, because when we opened this, we felt we were going to be competing against churches. That we didn't want the church ladies to be upset that we said we were going to have the reception here instead of there. And so we kept it small. And so to get families to use it and do that thing. And we decided not to do really fancy food. We looked at a lot of caterers around the area and things like that. And basically, we would kind of work with one primary caterer throughout the time. And we did very, very simple menus, meaning sandwiches. It's very typical. I know a lot of areas around the country have certain foods that you usually have at your funeral receptions. Around here, it was sandwiches, ham buns and potato salad and pasta salad, relish trays, a fruit tray. And then we'd have cake and cookies and punch and coffee. And we always tried to keep the average cost per meal somewhere between $7 and $10. That's a pretty good deal for things. And some people said, can we bring our own food in? And occasionally we let families bring their own food in. But by having affordable catering and stuff like that, very rarely did we have to do things like that. But we allowed that and just charged the room fee. So here's some lessons that we learned as we went along it. Like I told you, we did, kind of keep the menu selections pretty simple. We allowed, we did some fancier setups on the tables. And if people did want to upgrade to do it, we did do, there were fancier caterers in town. So we did kind of that stuff. When we first started this, we bought a bunch of glass plates and Corelle ware and dishes and all of that kind of stuff, thinking that we were going to be, kind of a step up above, having paper plates and doing that and things like that. Unfortunately, washing dishes in less than commercial dishwashers takes forever. And it was a real major pain to do glass dishes and coffee cups and all of that stuff. And I know sometimes funeral homes thinks that you got to be fancy and all of that stuff. And we found the reality is no, you can get upgraded disposable plates and upgraded disposable utensils that actually look like regular silverware, and they work just as well with everything like that. Well, the family center became so popular and such a normal part of our business now that on at least 65, maybe 70% of all the services that we do here at the funeral home typically have a reception attached to them. So even though, yes, we've seen a decline in visitation on the night before, and a lot of people come in and do just an hour visitation beforehand, we have receptions after the services now. And we've raised our prices on the use of the family center now, so it's more comparable to what we would charge for an evening of visitation. So it kind of balances itself out on that kind of stuff. And I don't know what we would do now. Receptions are such a major part of our business. I can't imagine ever not having them. And in fact, since COVID came in, we have not been able to have receptions, and I miss it terribly, and so do the people. And I look forward to the day when we can take all our masks off and finally get back to having receptions like we used to. One of the major things that did happen, and it actually changed funeral service in our whole area, once we started doing family centers here at the funeral home. The whole normal flow of things used to be that we would have a funeral service, we would line up all the cars in the parking lot, everybody would come in, have the service, we would have a procession to the cemetery, and then after that burial at the cemetery, the families would disperse from there and then either go back to their church, back to maybe the VFW hall, back to a house, and the receptions and all of those things would happen at another location. Well, when we started doing stuff at the funeral home, we kind of kept up with that same lineup for a little while, but it wasn't long before people decided, why don't we just stay here at the funeral home, and after the service, can't we do the service and then do the reception? Because the people didn't want to lose all the people. They wanted to be able to talk and meet and share stories and be with the folks that were at the service. So over a period of time, as the burial rate went down and the cremation rate went up, that whole concept and that whole timing changed with everything. So now it's basically we do a service, then we have a reception, and then if we're doing a burial, it's typically a private family graveside service and anybody who wants to go. And so it's really changed the way we do business. We don't have to man the parking lot as much as we used to. We don't have to line up cars. We don't have to, arrange for all of those things to happen. You do have to adjust some timing and figure out when the burials can take place and deal with overtimes at the cemeteries and things like that. But this has been so well received in the whole public that basically the church ladies now, when we do services at the church, they prefer to have a reception afterwards and then go. So they aren't stuck at the church waiting for an hour while everybody goes to the cemetery and then comes back. They've gotten used to that. They like the way that works. And so it's changed. And all over our community, the way we do things, it's lessened the whole idea of the importance of the procession to the cemetery. So consequently, I don't have to worry about limousines much anymore. And we don't even use a funeral coach as often as we used to in that situation. It became so popular, yes, we eventually converted our big major casket room and our whole tribute store, and we eliminated all of that. And we actually moved our family center from the house where it originally started back down to a larger area, very close to our chapel. And so now we can seat 120 people easily. And actually, our urn selection room and arrangement offices are right off the reception area, so the families can see everything from there. So, lessons learned. I said now it's without a doubt an essential part of what it is. Because as I have learned over time, the value of a funeral is the gathering together of people and the sharing of stories. And that happens at a reception better than any place else. We have a funeral service, we talk about things, and we sometimes are sad about those things. And what we've noticed and what I really enjoy about doing services and receptions and things like that is that after the service, the people come to the reception and there's laughter and there's smiles and the noise in the room is loud and they are sharing stories and gathering together and they're celebrating that life. So now when people leave the funeral home, they leave with a smile on their face, not a tear in their eye. It gives us as a funeral home a chance to meet with them kind of in a different light, to walk around the room with a coffee pot and share stories with them and become part of the whole situation. It's made our world a lot different. And gosh, I sure look forward to getting back to doing that once this whole COVID thing passes. So that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Here's a topic of other things that I put together, and I actually have notes. And if I would have had more time, I would have told you more about all this stuff. But if you'd like to learn about this, or maybe I'll do another presentation at another time, and we'll talk about the tribute store that came and went here at the funeral home. I'll talk about my aftercare and grief support program, which we moved away from and now have a transitional care program. I'll talk to you about how we built a new branch and how it ran successfully for almost 20 years. And then we realized maybe it was time to move on. talk about hiring women directors and arrangers and how well that is. I'll talk to you about the challenges of having an employee improvement program. And I'll tell you some wonderful stories about having a therapy dog around the funeral home. And the biggest challenge we've had there is finding a replacement. So, and I'll talk to you about pet death care and cremation and how those two, that pet care business, can really enhance your at-need human business too. Some things we've learned. So if you want to learn more about that, you can email me at daleclock@clockfuneralhome.com and I'll share my notes with you, or give me a call. We'll talk. We can do things like that. So I appreciate your time and efforts. Let me see my timer. Did I do pretty good? Yep. And I'm right here at the time frame, 45 minutes. They told me that's what I have. So thanks for listening today. I hope you got some information from this, and I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you later. Thank you very much.